is Michael Abramson. I am the chairman of the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust. The council was established in 1981 and is currently organized under the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. The council is dedicated to educating communities and school students and teachers about the Holocaust and the lessons learned from the Holocaust. We have traveled to almost every county in the state to present workshops, exhibits, plays, and speakers. We also provide lesson plans and materials and webinars to teachers and schools to support their efforts to teach about the Holocaust. Many of these materials are available for download on our 2 websites, which are listed below. We believe that the Holocaust teaches us to respect the values of democracy, inclusion, and plurality. The Holocaust teaches the necessity of safeguarding the rights of all in a diverse society. Due to the COVID pandemic, our state Holocaust observance is virtual this year. It is fitting that we honor the survivors of the Holocaust today, and that we emphasize the lasting lessons from the Holocaust. That every person has a responsibility to confront and denounce anti-Semitism, bigotry, racism, hatred, and genocide. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Shelley Blyweis, and I am the committee chair for the State Holocaust Memorial Day Commemoration, hosted by the North Carolina Council of the Holocaust. I'm also a child of 2 Polish Jewish Holocaust survivors, and I'm here to briefly share their story and tell you a little bit of what it was like growing up in the shadow of the Holocaust. My parents, Sophie and Eddie Blyweis, met and fell in love when my mother was deported from her hometown to my father's hometown. When the war broke out in 1939, my dad was 17 and my mom was 15. In October of 1939, the 3,800 Jews of Tarnobrzeg, my mother's hometown, were robbed and expelled to Mielec, a town of 4,000 Jews. In March of 1942, the Nazis dismantled Mielec a single day. They executed the elderly, deported the able-bodied for slave labor, and transported the rest to Auschwitz or a transit center in the Lublin district, Mieczysław Podlaski, or in Yiddish, Mizrich, which was my father's hometown. As the Nazis began liquidating the ghetto, my father's parents decided to try to save their children. So they took my dad's older sister, Esther, and arranged to have her go into a nunnery and become a nun. 2 days before she was supposed to go into the nunnery, she was shot in the streets by the Nazis. They went to my dad and said, "What can we do to save Eddie?" So they paid the equivalent in today's dollars of $170,000 and got my dad fake identity papers, and he became Jan Kozlowski, a Polish laborer in the Nazi army. My mom and her sister were in the fields working around Mizrich and saw their parents getting put into one of those deportation trucks that went to the train station full of people and returned empty. So they knew, and they saw their parents in the trucks, that they were going to not see their parents again. They took off their armbands and fled back to their hometown. And with the help of some friends, were able to obtain fake identity papers, and my mother went from being Sophie Greenberg to Zosia Menkiewicz, Polish Catholic laborer. She, her sister, and a mutual friend of theirs that happened to be a friend of my father's, wound up in Germany, in Stuttgart, Germany, working in what we call today a B&B, at the time a hostel. And she would work from early morning hours till late at night in the kitchen, cleaning rooms, and so on. In the meantime, my dad was corresponding with her because when my mother wound up in Dad's hometown, they got together like many teenagers today do and fell in love. So Dad is writing to my mother through this friend of theirs, and because she knew my dad's fake name, and they corresponded. Dad missed my mother so much that he faked papers and wound up going to Stuttgart to be closer to my mother. Within about 6 weeks, the Nazis found out and sent my dad to the front. They sent him to help repair a bridge that was being fought over, and the mortality rate was about 100%. My dad is with a couple of other laborers, and the one on his left gets shot and killed, the one on the right gets shot and killed. My dad lays down and pretends to be dead. He goes into hiding that night, and after a few days, the Allies overrun the bridge and find my father and realize he spoke 5 languages, and they made him an interpreter for the 172nd Combat Engineer Battalion of the 9th Army. After the war, he returned to Germany, found my mother, and they married in April of 1946. Because of the role my father has as an interpreter for the Allied Army, my parents were given passage on the May 1946 maiden voyage of the SS Marine Flasher that brought 600 survivors from Germany to the United States, where they started their new life. For my parents, their life began with my father's family in Cleveland, Ohio, where I was born. Then it continued with my mother's family in Houston, where my 2 brothers and their 5 children were born. So what was it like growing up with survivors of the Holocaust? At the time, we didn't know what to call it, but we later found out that my parents, like many other survivors, suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Depression was evident almost every day as I saw my mother cry. My mother had lost her parents and a younger brother, and her sister had survived. My dad lost his sister, his younger brother, and his parents. Dad didn't cry that much, but Mom cried every day. Other symptoms were things like impulsivity, uncontrollable rage, flashbacks, anxiety, fear, avoidance of others, and hypersensitivity. And of course, there was survivor guilt. Why did they survive? Strong family values were predominant among all the survivors because having new family was the way to overcome what the Nazis had tried to do. The PSD, of course, affects your identity, it affects your self-esteem, it affects how you interact with others and your view of the world. My parents, as many other survivors, tended to be task-oriented and hard workers. My dad went to work as a brush salesman because he knew the bristle business from his hometown. But my parents, like many other survivors, showed traits of resiliency, like adaptability, initiative, and tenaciousness. But above all, there was a strong psychological need to see their children as always being happy. So how did this manifest itself? First off, my parents, as many others, were very anxious and overprotective of me. They didn't want to see me hurt or in pain. I couldn't play sports. Name a sport where you can't get hurt. Couldn't play football, couldn't play basketball, couldn't play volleyball, couldn't play baseball, couldn't do track. Anything intellectual, I could do that. There was a strong distrust of the outside world. After all, and many survivors will tell you this, it was their neighbors who turned them in. Neighbors didn't hesitate to collaborate with the Nazis. So I had to keep a low profile. Don't let a lot of people know you're Jewish. The social circle that my parents had and I grew up with was with other survivors. Strong, strong need to assimilate and become citizens. My parents couldn't wait to take their citizenship exam. Of course, being European and they were teenagers when the war broke out, they didn't know really how to do discipline the right way. So the European way was to be very strict and rigid. Be obedient, don't talk back. Children are to be seen, not heard. When I wanted to go away to college, I talked about the University of Texas, which was 3 hours away from home. Survivors saw any kind of separation and individuation as abandoning the family. So why would I want to go so far away to school and leave the family, abandon the family? My parents were good at using guilt. And guilt about their well-being as a means of parental control. The first gal that I chose to marry, my mother didn't approve of and said, Hitler didn't do enough to destroy us, now you want to? So I went into therapy, and my therapist said, why don't you use that psychology on them? So I went back to my parents, mostly my mother, and said, look, if you decide not to come to the wedding, which is what she had told me, then I said, guess who's going to destroy the family? It's not going to be me. You will accomplish what Hitler wanted to do. Well, she changed her mind, accepted the fact that there was going to be a wedding, invited many of her friends, contacted the newspaper because there was going to be a reunion of Holocaust survivors, but the guilt worked. My parents and many other survivors valued education because they didn't get one when the war broke out, or their education was interrupted. So we were pushed to be high achievers. When I was coming out of high school, I wanted to become a rabbi. And my mother said, what kind of profession is that for a Jewish boy? She wanted me to be a doctor. And of course, their wishes and their desires took precedence. So the second generation was special. We were the ultimate defeat of Nazism, and the most important thing of value in our parents' lives. For my parents, their worst fear was losing us, or losing me because I was the first. So when I started going away to summer camp, I had to call home every week, just so they could hear my voice. That continued all the way through college. If I could not call on Sunday at 1 o'clock, I had to have a pretty good reason and let them know ahead of time, because if I didn't call at 1 o'clock, you can be sure they would have the police and the ambulance and other emergency personnel out looking for me. Of course, we felt a great burden to spare our parents any more pain and suffering. After all, look at what they had been through. So we were reluctant to ask what happened, and since they were trying to keep us from having any pain, nobody talked. We couldn't ask the questions. They were not willing to share. And if we expressed any kind of pain of our own, for example, Mom, that gal didn't want to talk to me or didn't want to go on a date or decided to hang up the phone on me, it hurts. They would go, how can that pain? You want to know pain? We'll tell you pain. So we pretty much had to look elsewhere to get our emotional needs met. I was in therapy. Of course, my parents, as others, placed expectations on us that might have exceeded our abilities and our resources. I was lazy, so I didn't do a lot of the work in school, or took my time doing it. And if I got B's and a few A's, the response was, you could not make all A's. And of course, I had to become a source of happiness and pride for my parents. I already told you they frowned on my being a rabbi. You know, it's not a good profession. But my son, the doctor, that would be a good profession. I and many other children of survivors chose careers that would help others. Of course, medicine's at the top of the list, but there was also law, and there was education, and the one I chose, which was social work. Both of my parents are now deceased, and before too long, there will not be any more witnesses to the events of the Holocaust. Then what? Will the Holocaust fade from our memories? No longer be relevant? How will the story of the Holocaust be told? In 1984, I attended the first international conference of children of Holocaust survivors. Main speaker, Elie Wiesel, raised the same question. His answer was that it was up to us, the second generation, to carry the torch and continue to bear witness to the Holocaust. And all 1,700 of us in attendance pledged to do that. And as we made that pledge, here's what Elie Wiesel said to us. Now you are being summoned to do something with pieces of words, with fragments of our vision, with remnants of our broken, dispersed memories. The testimony of our life and death will not vanish. Our memories will not die with us. And that is why I'm speaking to you today, to fulfill that pledge, to convey to the best of my abilities my parents' experiences and the impact of growing up in the shadow of the Holocaust. That is also why for the past 20 years, I have continued to share my story with teachers, hundreds of school students, and numerous church, civic, and community groups. And why I was willing to participate in the 2002 March of the Living week-long trip to Poland, where I cried every day, seeing the remnants of the once thriving Jewish communities and at the death camps where so many of our family members were murdered. Prior to moving to North Carolina in 2014, I was a docent at the Holocaust Museum Houston. And in the past few years, I've become a respected Holocaust educator for the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute program for senior adults at Duke University. I do this so that others may continue to learn and never forget. But I also do it as a way to honor my parents and the grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins I never knew. May their memories and the memories of all the Holocaust victims and survivors we remember today continue to be a blessing for us. Thank you.
It is the Jewish custom to light a memorial or a yahrzeit candle on the anniversary of a loved one's death as a symbol of a living memory of the deceased person. This custom has been adopted by Holocaust commemorations throughout the world, with remembrance candles lit represent the living memory of 6 million Jews and 5 million other precious souls murdered in the Holocaust, and to honor righteous non-Jews who saved thousands of lives. Our ceremony consists of 9 lit candles. The first candle, called the shamus, will light the other candles. The next 6 candles will be lit by Holocaust survivors, or children of survivors, or grandchildren of survivors. The 8th candle will be lit in honor of the liberators, the death camps, slave labor camps, and detention centers. The last candle will be lit by an individual who represents the righteous non-Jews who saved Jews and others in the Holocaust. Gisela Gross Abramson was a founder of the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust. She was an agent in the espionage unit of the Russian resistance forces, and she survived the Majdanek death camp. Gisela immigrated to the United States in May of 1946. The Shamus candle has been lit in memory of Gisela Gross Abramson. May the memory of every Holocaust victim inspire us to pursue meaningful and purposeful lives. Blessed art thou, soul of the universe, who melts hatred like candle wax, leaving only a loving heart. I now invite Pam Graber to light the first of 6 candles. Pam is the daughter of the late Abe Piasek. Abe survived Auschwitz and 3 slave labor camps. He was liberated by the 761st Tank Battalion, made up primarily of African American soldiers. Now I invite Barbara Fields to light the second candle, representing victims of the Holocaust. Barbara was born in Magellan Valley in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, in the Soviet Jewish resettlement camp. At 3 years old, she was separated from her mother and survived the rest of the war as an orphan. She immigrated to the United States in 1951. I now invite Eva Weinerman to light the third candle to commemorate victims of the Holocaust. Eva was born in Piala Polsk, Poland. She was hidden as a child and constantly on the run in fear of her life. Eva was liberated by the Russians in January of 1945. I now invite Harry Rubenstein to light the fourth candle representing victims of the Holocaust. Harry was born in Cologne, Germany. He immigrated in 1939 to the United States via England and Canada. I now invite John Glass, son of Morris Glass, and Jordan Glass, the grandson of Morris Glass, to light the fifth candle to commemorate victims of the Holocaust. Morris survived the Lodz ghetto and the Auschwitz and Dachau death camps. I now invite Mark Werner to light the sixth and final candle for victims of the Holocaust. Mark is the son of the late Harold Werner. Harold was a member of a large and successful Jewish fighting unit operating in the forest of eastern Poland during the Holocaust. His Jewish fighting unit inflicted serious damage on the German military, saving a large number of Jews from extermination. I now invite Hannah Thornton, the granddaughter of Albert Willis Grissom, to light a candle in honor of the liberators of the death camps. Albert Grissom was with the 240th Quartermaster Depot Supply Company and arrived at Dachau a few days after the actual liberation. He supplied Jewish inmates with food, water, blankets, and clothes. I now invite Bettina Pope to light a candle in honor of the righteous among the nations. Bettina is a distinguished English high school teacher in Wake County Public Schools and is training as a prominent Holocaust educator through the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum.
We now turn to El Malei Rachamim, a prayer in which we turn to and call upon God to be with and sustain those souls of the Jews who died in the Holocaust. We call upon God full of compassion to be with them and sustain them in eternity, and also to be with us as we pray that they rest in peace and comfort with our God full of compassion. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona, תחת כנפי השכינה, עם קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים, את נשמות 6 מיליון אחינו ואחיותינו, שנהרגו על קידוש השם. בעל הרחמים יסתירם, בסתר כנפיו לעולמים. ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתם, אדוני הוא נחלתם. וינוחו בשלום על משכבם, ונאמר Amen. We continue with the Mourner's Kaddish Yatom, in which we exalt and praise God's name in the depths of our mourning. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma di vrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayachon uvyomechon, uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uvizman kariv ve'imru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'alam u'almei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shmei dekudsha brichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da amiran ve'alma v'yimru. Amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'yimru Amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, v'yimru. Amen.
The Holocaust was a unique event in world history that must never be forgotten. Its lessons and relevance must continue to be taught, because we know what can happen if we allow hate, extreme prejudice, and discrimination to flourish and become official policy. And yet in our country, we are seeing a steady rise in the number of hate groups and hate crimes. And we are seeing a growing increase in anti-Semitic incidents. Elie Wiesel said, "I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Indifference is what allows evil to be strong, what gives its power. We must not let silence and indifference be the victors. We must denounce hatred and violence and intolerance, bigotry and bullying. We must promote tolerance with our voices, actions, and example. We must acknowledge and accept the other person as a fellow human being, regardless of their religion, cultural background, skin color, gender, belief system, or lifestyle, and acknowledge that that person is entitled to the same rights and privileges we have." This has been a challenging year for all of us, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us in our virtual 2021 State of North Carolina Holocaust Commemoration. Hopefully, it won't be long before we will be able to gather together again in person. Thank you.